Imagine stepping off a ship onto, well, an entirely uncharted coast. You're draped in iron armor, carrying weapons forged by the most advanced military machine of your era.
Right, you think you're untouchable.
Exactly. You view yourself as this untouchable god of warfare, destined to plant a flag and basically bend an entire continent to your will. But then, fast forward just a few brutal months. You're entirely naked.
Oh, totally stripped down.
Yeah. Your armor is gone. You're crawling through a swamp, digging up roots until your hands literally bleed. You're eating spiders just to stave off starvation. And you're utterly at the mercy of the very people you originally intended to enslave.
It's just, it is the ultimate deconstruction of the European colonizer. And welcome, everyone, to our custom-tailored deep dive. We are pulling from this massive stack of sources today.
We've got historical society records, literary anthologies,
post-colonial analyses, you name it. And our mission here is to trace the unbelievable true story of Álvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca. He was a 16th century Spanish explorer who set out to conquer the New World, but, ended up being completely conquered, stripped down, and remade by it.
Right, because we usually think about the Age of Discovery through this very rigid, kind of triumphant lens, right? Like the conqueror arrives, reads the proclamation, and just takes over.
Which is exactly the script Cabeza de Vaca started out following. He was born around 1490 into the Spanish nobility, the Hidalgos. He was steeped in this really aggressive ethos of holy war and conquest.
His grandfather was notoriously brutal in the Canary Islands, right?
Oh, absolutely. His entire worldview was built on this foundation of inherent superiority. Even his family name points to it. Cabeza de Vaca literally translates to head of a cow.
Wait, head of a cow. That's a noble title.
Yeah, it goes back to 1212. Apparently, a peasant ancestor marked an unguarded mountain pass with a cow skull, and that let the Christian armies ambush and defeat the Moorish forces.
Wow, so the king just elevated the family to nobility for that one act.
Exactly. So he's raised on these tales of military glory, violent subjugation, and the absolute certainty of Spanish dominance. Which brings us to 1527.
Right. He gets appointed royal treasurer and second in command for the Narváez expedition. This massive fleet sent to colonize La Florida, which was just this vaguely defined territory along the Gulf Coast.
But the disaster begins before they even establish a foothold. The logistics of these expeditions were just inherently precarious.
They lose men to desertion in the Caribbean almost immediately, right?
Yeah, and then a hurricane in Cuba sinks ships and drowns dozens of men. By the time they anchor near modern-day Tampa Bay in the spring of 1528, they're already completely depleted.
And this is where the expedition's commander, Pánfilo de Narváez, makes a catastrophic tactical error.
Oh, it exposes the fatal flaw of the entire conquistador enterprise.
Let's unpack this. Narváez decides to separate his forces in an unmapped swamp. He takes the heavily armed soldiers inland to search for Appalachia, this rumored city of gold, and orders the ships to sail up the coast and just, somehow meet them later.
Which is insane. Cabeza de Vaca vehemently objects to this. He argues they have no interpreters, barely any rations, and no reliable way to communicate with the fleet once they vanish into the interior.
Wait, so splitting up the sea and land forces in an unmapped swamp is basically the classic horror movie mistake, right? Like, hey guys, let's split up to cover more ground.
Totally.
Why would an experienced military man follow such an obviously flawed plan?
What's fascinating here is that it really highlights the blind greed of the conquistadors. The Spanish military operated on this highly rigid, bureaucratic script. They were designed to march inland, locate a centralized empire, capture its leader, and just assume control of the existing wealth and infrastructure.
Right, like they did with the Aztecs.
Exactly. But when they encountered a decentralized, hostile landscape with no golden cities and no roads, the entire strategic framework just collapsed. The greed evaporated all logic.
It really strikes me that their armor, their horses, and their ships function a lot like our modern reliance on a smartphone and GPS.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
They provided this massive illusion of control. And the moment that technology was removed, the moment those ships sailed out of sight, they were exposed as completely helpless. They didn't actually know how to survive in that environment.
The technological dependency was absolute. After months of just thrashing through the swamps of Florida under constant guerrilla attack from indigenous groups, finding absolutely zero gold, the surviving land forces stagger back to the coast.
And the ships are long gone.
Long gone. The Spanish are stranded. The hierarchy of command just dissolves into a pure, desperate bid for mere survival.
And the lengths they go to are staggering. I mean, they decide their only option is to build rafts and attempt to float across the Gulf of Mexico towards Spanish outposts in Mexico. But they have no shipbuilding tools, no nails, no pitch.
None. So they have to reverse engineer their own weaponry and status symbols to survive. They fashioned makeshift bellows out of deer hide and pumped air to get fires hot enough to melt down their crossbows, their spurs, their stirrups. They forged that metal into crude saws and nails.
That is wild.
Yeah. They wove rigging out of horsehair and used the shirts off their backs as sails. And they ate their horses to stay alive.
The psychological toll of that specific process must have been immense. The horse and the iron sword were the ultimate markers of Spanish aristocratic superiority. They literally had to melt down their superiority and eat it.
They systematically dismantled the European war machine, all to build 5 incredibly fragile rafts, crowding about 50 starving men onto each one.
And then they push out into the Gulf, but they have no understanding of the coastal currents.
Right. As they drift westward, they get caught in the massive outflow of the Mississippi River, swept out into deep water, and hit by a violent autumn storm.
So November 1528, Cabeza de Vaca's raft is smashed against the shore of an island off the coast of Texas, likely modern-day Galveston Island. They name it Malhado, the Island of Misfortune.
Fitting name.
Seriously. It's freezing, they are naked, their makeshift rafts are destroyed. Out of the 80 men who wash ashore there, only 15 survive the first winter.
And this specific period on Galveston Island creates one of the most profound sociological inversions in recorded history.
Yeah, things get really dark here.
They really do. A small group of 5 Spaniards, separated in a different camp on the island, are driven to the absolute brink by the freezing temperatures and starvation. They resort to cannibalism.
Oh, man.
They systematically consume the bodies of their dead comrades until only one man remains, left untouched because there was no one left to eat him.
The local indigenous groups, the Capokes and the Hans, eventually discover what the Spaniards have done. And the historical irony of their reaction is just incredible. I mean, the entire justification for Spanish conquest was the premise that indigenous peoples were godless savages who needed European civilization.
Right, but the indigenous people were violently appalled. Cabeza de Vaca recorded that the natives were so outraged and horrified by the cannibalism that a riot nearly broke out.
Wait, really? A riot?
Yeah. Had the local tribes discovered this earlier, they likely would have executed every remaining Spaniard on the spot. The so-called savages became the moral arbiters, looking down in absolute disgust at the barbaric Europeans.
That moment shatters the power dynamic completely. Cabeza de Vaca hits rock bottom. No authority, no weapons, no clothes. He is absorbed into the local tribes, later including the Karankawa and the Uguays, but not as a guest, as an enslaved laborer.
He's forced to perform the most grueling tasks, digging underwater roots from freezing cane brakes until his fingers are just raw and bleeding.
And his diet. I mean, it illustrates the total annihilation of his former self. During these frequent periods of severe seasonal famine, he documents eating spiders, ant eggs, worms, lizards, ground-up bones.
Rotting wood.
Even deer dung.
He literally writes that if there had been stones in that landscape, they would have eaten those as well.
So we have a man stripped of every conceivable layer of his former identity. He realizes the conquistador mindset is entirely useless here. To survive, he has to adapt in a way no European had ever attempted.
Yeah, he and the 3 other remaining survivors from the entire expedition, Alonso del Castillo, Andrés Dorantes, and a remarkable man named Estevanico.
Ah, Estevanico, an enslaved Moroccan Moor who becomes the first black explorer of North America.
Exactly. These 4 men completely rebrand themselves. They realize that sheer manual labor will eventually kill them. They need leverage.
So what do?
Over several years, they managed to decode and learn the incredibly complex sign language systems used for intertribal trade across the Gulf Coast and the interior. They map the social networks of the region. And they step into a highly specific cultural vacuum by presenting themselves as healers.
I want to dig into the mechanics of this.
Yeah.
Because they start practicing this bizarre, syncretic form of medicine.
Oh, it's fascinating.
They blend traditional European Catholic rituals, making the sign of the cross, breathing on the sick, reciting the Pater Noster and the Ave Maria with indigenous Native American healing practices, like scarification, cauterization, and physically sucking on wounds.
Yeah.
And somehow, people actually start recovering.
The efficacy of their healing is this incredible intersection of psychology, existing indigenous frameworks, and just sheer luck. We know about the placebo effect, but beyond that, the indigenous societies they encountered already had a deeply ingrained cultural category for the outsider shaman.
Oh, I see.
Spiritual power was often believed to reside on the margins of society, with those who were distinctly different. These four strange, bearded, foreign men fit that archetype perfectly. So the indigenous people integrated them into their own cosmological worldview.
And they gain this massive following. Thousands of indigenous people begin escorting them from village to village as they walk westward across the continent. They literally refer to them as children of the sun.
Yeah, it's wild.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. He's suddenly this revered medicine man. But we have to ask, was he experiencing a genuine spiritual awakening, or was this just the ultimate survival hustle?
Well, this raises an important question about identity. The consensus among post-colonial scholars is that it was both. You cannot fake a role like that for 8 years and 6,000 miles without it rewiring your own brain.
That makes sense.
When he first arrived in the Americas, Cabeza de Vaca utilized what scholars call the rhetoric of not. He defined the native peoples entirely by their absences compared to Europe. They had no iron, no written law, no permanent cities, no agriculture.
Just a void waiting to be filled by Spanish culture.
Exactly. But as he enters this middle space, walking across the continent, that language completely shifts. He stops using the rhetoric of not and becomes an active participant observer.
He actually starts paying attention.
Yes. He begins meticulously documenting their intricate seasonal migrations, identifying how they track time by the ripening of specific fruits or the movement of constellations. He details their complex family structures, their diplomacy, their mourning rituals. He views them as fully realized, deeply complex human societies.
He essentially becomes the region's first ethnographer. He is no longer truly Spanish, but he's not entirely indigenous either. He is this Indianized Spaniard.
Which perfectly sets the stage for a massive collision of worlds in 1536. After 8 years of wandering barefoot across Texas, Chihuahua, and Sonora, they reach the Sinaloa River in western Mexico.
And for the first time in nearly a decade, they encounter a group of their own people.
And what a deeply jarring encounter that must have been.
Try to visualize this from the perspective of the Spanish soldiers. They're part of a detachment led by a man named Diego de Alcaraz. They are riding through the brush on a routine slave hunting expedition.
Right.
Suddenly, they are confronted by a man walking out of the wilderness. He is naked, his skin is burned dark by years in the sun, his hair is matted to his waist, he's covered in tribal tattoos and piercings.
Visually indistinguishable from the indigenous population.
Exactly. But then this wild man opens his mouth and addresses them in flawless, elegant Castilian Spanish.
The soldiers were paralyzed with shock. The official accounts state they stared at him in profound silence for a long period. They just couldn't comprehend what they were looking at.
I bet.
But the visual dissonance was quickly overshadowed by a massive ideological conflict, because right behind this strange, naked Spanish noble was an escort of thousands of indigenous people who viewed him with absolute reverence.
And the Spanish slavers look at that massive escort and immediately see a highly profitable catch. They want to throw them all in chains.
And Cabeza de Vaca is utterly repulsed. He clashes with his countrymen. He uses his residual authority to negotiate peace and protect his followers.
But he also employs this brilliant piece of legal maneuvering, right?
Oh, it's genius. He instructs his indigenous followers to return to their villages and construct large wooden crosses. He then informs the Spanish soldiers that these villages are under the protection of the cross.
Because under Spanish crown law at the time, it was illegal to enslave indigenous people who had actively converted or submitted to Christianity.
Precisely. It's a masterful manipulation of the bureaucracy that originally doomed him. Shortly after this, he returns to Spain in 1537 and writes his masterpiece, La Relación, which is later known as Naufragios.
It is the first European book devoted entirely to North America, and it's revolutionary because of its tone. Unlike standard logs that focus entirely on topography and military logistics, his account showcases a bizarrely modern empathy for native peoples.
He records the specific names, languages, and cultural practices of dozens of extinct tribes, making his writing the only historical proof they ever existed. He explicitly argues to the crown that these people possess immense intellect and humanity.
He insists the only legitimate way to bring them into the empire is through kindness and diplomacy, not violence. So the crown is impressed, and they appoint him governor of a territory encompassing modern Argentina and Paraguay in 1540.
Right, the Rio de la Plata. He even becomes the first European to see Iguazu Falls. But when he tries to apply his enlightened views as a colonial ruler, the system violently rejects him.
He tries to protect the Guarani people. He explicitly bans the colonists from buying, trading, or enslaving indigenous women.
And the colonists, who relied entirely on brutal exploitation to generate wealth, view him as an existential threat, so they get rid of him. Led by Domingo Martinez de Ayala, they overthrow him in 1544 for poor administration.
They throw him in prison and ship him back to Spain in chains. The man who survived a shipwreck and an 8-year trek is undone by the bureaucratic greed of his own countrymen. He eventually gets exonerated, but spends his final years in relative poverty, dying around 1559.
This is tragic.
It really is.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean? We paint him as a hero ahead of his time, but wait, what about Estevanico?
Yeah, the Moorish slave who survived it all right alongside him.
Exactly. Cabeza de Vaca never freed him, right?
Mm.
And his whole peaceful conversion idea, was that really just a cheaper, easier way for Spain to colonize?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you're absolutely right. He was still a man of his time. We have to report the facts impartially here. He didn't oppose imperialism or slavery entirely. He just opposed violent subjugation.
A softer touch, but the same ultimate goal.
Yes. Yet, his legacy is massive regardless. His writings influenced human rights champion Bartolomé de las Casas. He inspired the myths of the 7 cities of gold, which pointed Coronado's expedition.
Not to mention establishing the cultural roots of Chicano curanderismo, or folk healing.
And marking the first major contribution to Chicano literature.
It's an incredible legacy, which brings the reality of this history directly back to you, the listener. Cabeza de Vaca's story teaches us that true discovery isn't about planting a flag. It's about letting go of your preconceived notions.
Exactly. When you are entirely stripped of your armor and your ego, you are forced to actually listen to and learn from the people around you.
Which leaves you with one final provocative thought to ponder on your own. When Cabeza de Vaca washed up on that freezing beach, he lost everything that made him a European conqueror. Did he fundamentally fail as a conquistador? Or, in losing all of that, did he actually succeed in becoming the very first true American, a hybrid identity born entirely of the New World? Something to think about.